Have you ever stopped to think about what happens after we die? Is it really the end, or could it just be the beginning of something new? This question, which many avoid, sparks a deep curiosity in all of us. Regardless of belief or religion, there is a natural uneasiness about what awaits us on the other side. And perhaps it's no coincidence that so many cultures around the world approach death with a mix of mystery, fear, and even hope. It's the kind of question that accompanies us throughout life, even when we try to ignore it. In Christianity, especially in Catholicism, the concept of life after death is present on every page of the Bible, in every teaching of Jesus. From the promise of eternal life for those who believe, to the miracle stories where death seems to be just a pause. But what's interesting is that the Bible doesn't just provide straightforward answers. Instead, it challenges us to think. Remember the story of Lazarus? Jesus brought him back to life after 4 days in the tomb, but why? Wouldn't it have been easier to let him rest? This is a sign that perhaps death is not the final point we imagine. Lazarus lived again, but not just physically. The message was clear: there's something beyond what our eyes can see, something that goes beyond the limits of our earthly understanding. But what about reincarnation? Does it make sense in the biblical context? At first glance, it seems not. Reincarnation, so popular in other cultures and religions, is not an explicit doctrine in Christian tradition. The idea of multiple lives to purify the soul and reach perfection, though attractive to many, does not fit with the central message of the gospel. The Bible is quite clear in stating that it is appointed for men to die once and after that comes judgment. And yet, this vision of a final judgment may seem frightening to some. But what if it's not as dark as it seems? What if judgment is more like a reflection of what we did, both good and bad, a mirror that would show us how we lived our lives and where we're going afterward? This question of life after death has always intrigued great theologians and Christian thinkers. St. Paul, for instance, had such a profound experience that he believed he was taken to the third heaven, a place of indescribable glory. He couldn't find human words to describe what he saw, but the transformation in his life was undeniable. The impact of that experience shaped all his preaching about eternal life. Paul began to live with an absolute certainty that what awaits us on the other side is as real as the world we touch now. For him, death was not something to be feared but the necessary path to true life. And that's a powerful idea, isn't it? Living without fear of the end because, for Paul and so many others, the end was just the beginning. But this leads us to another intriguing question: what about those who haven't had an experience like Paul's? Those who have never seen or felt anything supernatural, what remains for them? Is death just a blank canvas? And if so, how do we deal with that? Many men, throughout the centuries, have faced this dilemma. Kings, warriors, thinkers, they all, at some point, ask themselves, what comes next? Alexander the Great, the conqueror of the world, cried because there were no more lands to conquer, but did he not realize that the real challenge was facing what comes after the last battle? The battle with one's own mortality. And this is where the stories of the apostles become even more relevant. Each of them lived with the conviction that Jesus didn't just talk about life after death, he demonstrated it by rising again. Thomas, for example, only believed when he touched the wounds of the resurrected Christ. This detail is fascinating. Even the most skeptical of the apostles needed physical proof, and he got it. And how many times do we, ourselves, not feel like Thomas? We want evidence, something tangible, proof that life doesn't end with the last breath. Now, if we step away for a moment from the great names of biblical history and think about contemporary experiences, many people report near-death experiences. Maybe you know someone who has been through this. The stories vary, but they often have something in common: a light, a feeling of peace, a sense that life continues somewhere. Even for those who don't believe in reincarnation or the traditional concept of life after death, these experiences are, at the very least, intriguing. What do they mean? Could they be glimpses of what Paul saw, Or simply the brain's response in its final moments? The fact is, whatever happens after the heart stops beating, the mystery keeps us connected to something greater. It makes us seek answers. It makes us want to understand more. Life after death is not just a theological or philosophical question, it's something that touches each of us because, in the end, we're all on the same path. And what if life indeed continues? What if, instead of a farewell, death is just a transition to something more? And what if, instead of seeing death as an abyss, it were a bridge? Think for a moment. Everything we know about life after death comes largely from accounts and teachings passed down through generations. And in the Christian tradition, these teachings are not just vague stories, but intense accounts from those who faced death and returned to tell the tale. Take, for example, the experience of Saint Peter. He was a man who knew the power of life and death up close. Impulsive, human, he made mistakes, but he was also transformed by what he saw and lived. When he witnessed the transfiguration of Christ on the Mount, he saw Moses and Elijah, two men who had already died, talking with Jesus as if death were just a detail. Imagine the scene. For Peter, that moment was a window into something beyond human understanding. It was as if God were saying, "Look, death is not what you think." After experiencing this, Peter lived the rest of his life with immense courage. He knew that there was something beyond. And when the time for his own death finally came, crucified upside down, he did not bow to fear. He knew he was heading toward something greater. And it's not just Peter. Many other followers of Jesus also faced death with surprising serenity. John, the beloved apostle, had an extraordinary vision of what comes after life. He saw the New Jerusalem, a place where there was no more pain, no more tears, nor suffering. In the book of Revelation, he describes this place with impressive detail, as if he were looking directly into the future. For John, death was not a conclusion but the beginning of a new story. Now, think about it, he was exiled, alone, on an island. Any ordinary person would see that as the end of the road. But instead, he received a vision that completely transformed the idea of the end. And if that weren't enough, John gives us another important clue: those who believe, those who follow the path, will have access to the tree of life. And what does that mean? It's almost as if we are returning to the beginning, to the Garden of Eden, but this time with a greater understanding of what it means to live eternally. Now, returning a little more to our present, we can't ignore that over the centuries, the idea of life after death has inspired and transformed millions of people. Think of the stories of the martyrs, for example. Men and women who, in the face of death, maintained their faith. For them, death was just a door to something greater. It was not an endpoint but a starting point. What gives someone that courage? Did they know something that we don't fully understand yet? Or is faith truly capable of connecting us to a reality that transcends the fear of death? Each of these martyrs, from the early Christians to the present day, left a legacy. They showed us that by believing in something greater, even the act of dying becomes an expression of faith and hope. But, like everything in life, these stories also leave us with questions. Why do some seem to have such clear visions of what comes after, while others walk through life with doubts and uncertainties? Will life after death be something we all experience equally? Or, just as our life here is unique, will our journey after death also be individual? These questions invite us to reflect, to seek answers, but also to accept that perhaps some of these answers will only come when we cross that line. And while we're here, it's fascinating to think about the many ways people from different times and cultures have tried to make sense of death. The very concepts of heaven, hell, purgatory, are ideas that have evolved over the centuries but always with a common point: the belief that something exists beyond what our eyes can see. Purgatory, for example, is often misunderstood. It is not an eternal punishment but a process of purification, of preparation for something greater. It's as if the soul needed time to adjust, to be purified before entering the presence of God. But even so, this idea of an intermediate place, a place of transition, also reminds us that, for the Christian, death is not the end of the line. And when we think of hell, images of fire, suffering, and pain often come to mind. But what if hell is actually the complete separation from God? An existence without hope, without love, without the divine presence. Hell, then, would not be so much a physical place of torture but a condition of the soul that has distanced itself from what is good, from what gives life. On the other hand, heaven, which so many apostles and saints have described, seems to be much more than a place with clouds and angels playing harps. Heaven, in fact, is the complete union with God, the reunion with love, peace, and fullness. A state of being that transcends anything we can imagine here on earth. These ideas lead us to an important question: are we living our lives with this understanding? Are we ready for what comes after? If death is not the end but a transition, how should we face each moment of our lives? And even more importantly, how does this impact the decisions we make every day? If there is something beyond this world, if there is life after death, how does that change the way we see the now? This makes us think that maybe the way we live our lives here carries much more weight than we imagine. If life after death is real, then every choice, every act, every word spoken or unspoken may be shaping that destiny. It's not just about what we believe, but how those beliefs impact our daily lives. If we think of death as a transition, a bridge to something greater, it makes sense to reflect on the kind of legacy we will leave behind. After all, if life continues in some way, what do we carry with us? Some say we take only the love we gave and received. Others believe it is faith, compassion, the kindness with which we treated others. And, in a way, this resonates with what Jesus taught throughout his life: love for others, the importance of living with purpose, of being a light in the world. When we look at the apostles, saints, and martyrs, we see this idea reflected in their stories. They lived with the conviction that what they did here had eternal consequences. It wasn't just about living for the now, but about living with an eye on what would come after. And with that perspective, each day became an opportunity to prepare, to connect more deeply with that which is eternal. Perhaps you're asking yourself, but what about me? How does this apply to my life? I am not a saint, nor an apostle. How can I live with that same certainty? The truth is that all of us, in some way, have these questions within us. Life is full of uncertainties, and sometimes it feels like the day-to-day swallows us up with its problems, commitments, and responsibilities. But when we stop to think about what truly matters, about what is beyond our routine, we begin to realize that life cannot just be this. There has to be something more. Something that gives meaning to the chaos, the struggles, the moments of joy and pain. And that's where the idea of life after death begins to take shape. Christian teachings on eternal life invite us to look at life in a broader way. It's not just about ourselves, but about how our actions impact others and how, together, we are all connected to something greater. Think of the stories of men like Saint Francis of Assisi, who renounced all his material possessions to live a life of simplicity, dedicating himself to serving the poor and the sick. For him, attachment to earthly things was just an obstacle to reaching the true treasure, life with God. Francis firmly believed that by leaving behind everything the world offered, he was gaining much more in return: peace of mind, the freedom to live fully, without fear of what would come after. And this is a lesson we can apply in many ways, whether we are rich or poor, famous or anonymous. Because, in the end, what truly matters is how we live our days and how we prepare for what comes next. We will all face that transition one day, whether we're ready or not. But the real question is, how do we choose to live now? What are we doing to prepare, not just for the end of life, but for the beginning of what lies beyond it? And if, even so, doubt remains, if the fear of death continues to haunt us like a shadow that never fades, it might be worth looking at the accounts of those who have been close to it. How many people have reported near-death experiences, describing visions of peace, light, and a deep feeling that something greater awaited them? Although these are not experiences that can be scientifically proven, it is intriguing to notice that many of them share similar aspects, regardless of the person's culture or beliefs. Imagine standing on the brink of death, feeling your body weaken, and suddenly being enveloped by an intense and warm light. A place where time no longer exists, where suffering has no place, where there is an indescribable peace. Could this be the prelude to what John saw in his vision of the New Jerusalem? Or perhaps a glimpse of the paradise promised by Jesus to the thief on the cross? The truth is that these accounts, while different in some details, converge on one point: death, for many who have felt it up close, is not the end, but a passage to something extraordinary. And if these glimpses are real, what do they mean for us, who are still here? And if, for a moment, we could set aside our worries about the everyday and allow ourselves to believe that there is a greater purpose to all of this? That suffering, losses, joys, and moments of happiness are all part of a path that prepares us for what comes after. Could this idea change the way we face life's challenges? Because if death is not the end, then everything we do here takes on a new meaning. Our pains, our mistakes, our regrets, all of this can be transformed in the light of this new perspective. And this leads us to an interesting reflection. Are we living our lives with this awareness? Or are we so caught up in the present, in the problems and worries of everyday life, that we forget to look beyond? Because if there's one certainty in this life, it's that all of us, at some point, will have to face the unknown. And what do you want to feel when that moment comes? Fear? Uncertainty? Or peace and confidence that there is something beyond? The truth is that this question isn't simple, but it's deeply important. The peace, the confidence in what comes after, is something many seek throughout their lives. But can that be achieved? Is there a way to prepare for the inevitable so that fear no longer holds power over us? For those who believe in life after death, the path seems to lie in faith, in the hope that death is not a punishment, but a reward, the promise of something better. It's about believing that, at the end of it all, there will be a reunion, a transformation, a new beginning. Now, imagine how this certainty could change the way we live our lives here. If we have the conviction that something greater is waiting for us, how does that affect our daily decisions? Think of the times we hesitated, the choices we made out of fear of making mistakes, the opportunities we let pass because fear paralyzed us. But what if we truly knew that every small step, every act of kindness, every decision made with faith brings us closer to that promised future? Suddenly, difficulties lose some of their strength. The pains of everyday life become more bearable because we know they are temporary, that what is coming is far greater than any obstacle we might face now. Perhaps this is the key: living with purpose. Living as if each day were preparation, not for the end, but for what comes next. Because, if we think about it, life here is a school. Each challenge, each victory, each defeat shapes us in ways we may not fully understand. And often, it's in adversity that we learn the most, that we grow the most. The saints and apostles understood this in a very deep way. They lived their lives with their eyes set on what comes after, without neglecting the present. On the contrary, it was precisely this faith in the future that made them live the present more fully, with more courage, with more love. And here, in today's world, we are invited to do the same. We don't need to be saints to seek this fullness, this certainty that death is not the end. We can start now, with small gestures. Each day, we have the chance to live more consciously, more aligned with what we believe. If we believe that life continues, that there is something greater, then it doesn't make sense to live trapped in fear. It doesn't make sense to hold on to temporary things, to small offenses, to moments of anger or despair. Because, in the end, all of this is temporary. What remains is love, is faith, is the impact we leave on the lives of those around us. And if life here is only the beginning, what are we doing with it? Are we living with intention, with open hearts, ready for what comes next? Or are we just surviving, passing through the days without questioning what truly matters? This reflection brings us back to the central idea: if there is life after death, then the way we live now carries much greater weight. It's not about waiting for the end, but about living the present with the certainty that it is preparation for something more grandiose. And, of course, there are still doubts. There will always be questions we cannot fully answer while we're here. But the beauty of faith is precisely that, believing, even when we don't have all the answers. It's trusting that, just as the sun rises every day, there is something beyond the horizon of death. Something that, as mysterious as it may be, calls to us, attracts us, invites us to live more deeply. And this attraction is powerful. Even if, at times, we can't fully understand what's on the other side, something inside us knows that we are not alone on this journey. There is a promise. There is a purpose. And as we reflect on all of this, we are called to look within and ask ourselves, am I living in a way that prepares me for what comes next? It's not about living in fear or anxiety, but with joy, with hope, with the certainty that each moment, no matter how small it may seem, has value. If life is eternal, then every second counts. Every decision we make here can echo in eternity. Imagine if, at the moment of our death, instead of fear, we felt a profound peace, as if we were returning home. That is the promise of many stories we've heard, of people who were at the brink of death and described that sensation of returning to something familiar, something they always knew was there, waiting for them. Perhaps death is exactly that, a reunion. A return to what was always ours. And if that's the case, what an incredible consolation it brings. What strength it can give us to live our days here with more courage, more compassion, more love. But even with this hope, we still wonder, what awaits us on the other side? Will we see those we love? Will we be able to look back on our lives here and understand everything all at once? Maybe yes, maybe no. What matters is that while we are here, we have the chance to build something beautiful. We have the chance to prepare ourselves, to live each day as if it were part of a greater plan, as if we were drawing closer to something grand that we may not yet fully comprehend, but that we deeply feel. And it's not just a vague sensation or blind belief, but something that resonates within us, especially when we face difficult moments, when we are confronted with the fragility of life. It's in those moments that the big questions emerge: what really matters? What do we leave behind? And what will we find when we cross that invisible line between life and death? Think about the countless stories we've heard over the centuries, from ordinary people to great religious figures. How often do these stories speak of an indescribable peace, of a guiding light, of a feeling of welcome and love? And despite all the uncertainty surrounding death, these experiences offer us a glimpse of what may lie ahead. Which leads us to ask, what if, instead of fearing death, we saw it as a continuation? As a journey that doesn't end here but expands into something greater, something our hearts sense but our minds may not yet grasp? And this is where the stories of apostles, saints, and theologians come back to inspire us. These people lived with an unshakable confidence in what was to come. Take St. Paul, for example, who wrote about his own death in an almost serene way, like someone who was about to finish a race and finally reach the finish line. He did not see death as a tragic end but as the conclusion of a mission, the entrance into a new reality where he would finally see face to face what he had only glimpsed during his life. We must not forget St. Augustine, who, in his Confessions, described his relentless search for answers about what lies beyond. He spent years of his life trying to fill the void inside with knowledge, pleasure, and status, until he realized that nothing in this world could truly satisfy his longing for the eternal. "You have made us for yourself, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you," he wrote. These words still resonate strongly today, echoing the feeling that, regardless of what we may achieve or experience here, there will always be a part of us that seeks something more, something that transcends the material. This search, this restlessness, is something we can all relate to. After all, how many times do we find ourselves thinking about the purpose of everything? About what truly holds value? As we face losses, challenges, and life surprises, we are forced to confront the reality that nothing here is permanent. Everything we love, everything we build, will one day be left behind. But this need not be viewed with sadness. On the contrary, it can be an invitation to live more fully, to appreciate each moment, knowing that there is something beyond what our eyes can see. And perhaps it is this that motivates us to continue asking, to keep seeking answers about what happens after death. Because, ultimately, this question is not just about the end, but about the beginning of something new, something that gives meaning to everything we live here. It's no wonder that so many cultures and religions around the world have their own views on what happens after death. But for many, what resonates most strongly is the idea that we are not alone. That, in some way, we are being prepared, guided, shaped for a destiny greater than we can imagine. And it is precisely at this point that faith becomes essential. To believe in something we cannot see, but can feel within. To believe that there is a plan, a greater purpose that awaits us. It's not easy. And we are often tempted to doubt, especially when confronted with suffering, loss, and the emptiness that death seems to bring. But it is precisely in these moments that faith can sustain us, reminding us that life does not end here. That even in the darkest nights, there is a light ahead, guiding our steps towards something that goes beyond what we can comprehend now. The more we allow ourselves to believe this, the more we can live lightly, with purpose. It doesn't mean we will stop feeling fear or sadness, but that we will have an anchor, something to hold on to when everything around us seems to be falling apart. Perhaps this is what so many saints and theologians have taught us, to live with the certainty that, in the end, what truly matters is not what we achieve here, but how much we love, how much we give, how much we live in harmony with what we believe to be eternal. Imagine for a moment that you could live without the fear of the end. How would that change your choices? Would you worry less about the small things and value more what truly matters? Maybe you would allow yourself to live with more courage, with more generosity, with more joy. Because, deep down, knowing that death is not the end, but the beginning of something extraordinary, could be the key to unlocking a new way of living. And this new way of living can connect us even more with the deepest part of ourselves. After all, if we believe that life continues, that our actions have eternal consequences, then every act of kindness, every word of love, every gesture of compassion becomes part of a much larger tapestry. A tapestry that we are weaving not only for ourselves but for those who will come after us. And that, in itself, is a powerful thought. Because it means that, even after we are gone, something of us remains. Our actions, our choices, our words, all these echo into eternity in ways we may never fully measure. And that thought brings with it both a responsibility and an opportunity. The responsibility to live with purpose, knowing that our actions have a lasting impact. And the opportunity to leave a legacy that goes beyond our life here, that touches the people around us in ways we may not see now, but that will bloom in the future. And that's the beauty of reflecting on life after death. When we allow ourselves to truly think about what might come after, we realize that death doesn't have to be the end of everything we've built, loved, and dreamed. It can be a continuation, a transformation, and that changes how we face our days. Suddenly, what once seemed insignificant gains a new glow. That conversation you had, that act of kindness, that moment of silence with yourself, all of it begins to connect in a much deeper and more meaningful way. Now, as we wrap up this video, I want to invite you to reflect on what was discussed here. Which of these ideas resonate with you? Have you ever thought about what comes after death? About how your beliefs and choices today can shape not only your life but also what may come beyond it? These are profound topics that touch the essence of what it means to be human, and it's these reflections that connect us on a higher level. If you felt that these ideas stirred something inside you, I encourage you to watch the video again. There may be points you want to explore further, or stories that, when heard again, take on new meanings. Leave your comment below, share your reflections. What do you think about life after death? How do you view death, and what do you hope for beyond it? This is a space for exchanging ideas, for learning from one another, and perhaps helping to ease some of the fears and doubts that all of us, at some point, have felt. And of course, I want to hear from you. What other topics would you like to see here on the channel? What else do you want to explore when we talk about life, death, and what might come after? Leave your suggestion in the comments, because it's through these exchanges that we can keep deepening these conversations. There's still so much for us to reflect on and discover together, so feel free to share your thoughts. And if you found this video interesting, remember to like it and subscribe to the channel. This helps bring these reflections to more people and, who knows, perhaps touch more hearts. The journey doesn't end here, neither ours nor the reflection on what comes after life. So let's continue together, exploring the mystery, the possible answers, and what it means for how we live now. See you in the next video.